The night was dark and stormy as the plane sliced through turbulent clouds. Inside the cabin, passengers clutched their armrests, their faces a canvas of anxiety. Among them was Eliza, a striking 23-year-old with flowing raven hair and a reputation for her fierce temper. Eliza had reluctantly boarded the flight, her lips set in a thin line. Her bad temper had been stirred earlier that day by a series of unfortunate events, and this flight was the final straw. Her heart pounded as the turbulence intensified, rattling the nerves of even the most seasoned travelers. The seatbelt sign lit up, and the cabin crew announced that they were entering a zone of severe turbulence. The plane shook violently, and screams filled the air as the flight attendants struggled to maintain their composure. Eliza clenched her armrests, her knuckles turning white. She was never one to show fear, but tonight was different. Lightning flashed outside, casting eerie shadows on the wings, and that's when she saw them. Shadowy figures with tattered wings, hovering near the engines.
What are those things?
Eliza whispered to her seatmate, a middle-aged man who was equally terrified.
I have no idea,
he stammered, his face pale. The winged apparitions grew bolder, darting towards the engines with malevolent intent. Panic spread through the cabin as passengers realized their dire situation. The plane's engine is sputtered and alarms blared.
Mayday! Mayday!
Came the frantic call from the cockpit. The captain's voice, laced with fear, crackled over the intercom.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have encountered a severe problem. We're being attacked by some unknown entities. Brace for impact.
Eliza's heart pounded harder as the plane descended rapidly. The winged ghosts seemed to be drawn to the dying aircraft, circling it like vultures. Passengers screamed, and chaos reigned. Eliza knew she had to do something. Her life depended on it. Ignoring the fear that gripped her, she stood up, her eyes locked on the shadowy figures outside. She approached the emergency exit, unlocked it, and pushed it open. Wind and rain lashed at her face as she stepped onto the wing. The ghosts turned their attention to her, their eerie, glowing eyes locking onto her every move. Eliza's temper flared, her anger at the day's events igniting a spark within her.
Get away from this plane, you wretched creatures,
she shouted, her voice fierce and commanding. To her surprise, the ghosts hesitated. Eliza was known for her stubbornness and her refusal to back down from a challenge. She was also known for her striking beauty, which seemed to have an otherworldly effect on those around her. Summoning her inner strength, Eliza began to recite an incantation she had learned from her grandmother, a gifted witch. The words flowed from her lips like a haunting melody, filling the air with an aura of power. The ghosts wavered, their forms flickering like candle flames. Eliza's anger fueled her magic, and the ghosts began to retreat, their wings recoiling as if scorched by an invisible fire. But the battle was far from over. The plane continued its descent, heading straight for a dark, looming forest. Eliza knew she had to act quickly. She focused all her energy on the plane's engineers, using her newfound power to coax them back to life. With a sudden burst of energy, the engineers roared back to life, and the plane pulled out of its nosedive just in time. The passengers cheered, and even the flight attendants couldn't contain their amazement. As the plane leveled out, Eliza staggered back inside, her body drained of energy. She had saved them, but at a great cost. Her beauty had captured the attention of the ghosts, and her anger and magic had driven them away. Hours later, as the plane landed safely at its destination, Eliza was rushed to a hospital. She'd survived the night, but her body was in bad shape. The ordeal had taken a toll on her, physically and mentally. In the days that followed, Eliza became something of a legend. Passengers and crew members alike spoke of the beautiful woman who had saved them from the winged ghosts. But Eliza knew the truth. Her temper and her strength had been her salvation. As she lay in her hospital bed, recovering from her injuries, Eliza couldn't help but reflect on the events of that fateful night. She had faced her worst fears and emerged victorious. And though she bore the scars of battle, she knew that she would forever be a force to be reckoned with. The night had been a harrowing journey into the unknown, but it had also been a test of her inner strength and resilience. Eliza knew that she'd passed that test with flying colors, and she would carry the memory of that night with her for the rest of her life.
The countryside house stood silent and imposing, surrounded by fields that stretched out into the darkness. It was the sort of place where the night held its breath, and every creak and rustle seemed amplified. Inside, Sarah sat alone, her eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit room. The wind howled outside, and the ancient oak trees cast eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah had always found comfort in this house, but tonight, it felt like a prison. She had been alone for days, her husband away on a business trip, and the isolation was beginning to take its toll. A rustling sound from the hallway snapped her attention to the door. Her heart lurched as the thought crossed her mind. Had she locked all the doors and windows? She couldn't be sure anymore. The creeping unease in her gut intensified. Another noise, closer this time, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone's fingernail against glass. Sarah's breath quickened as she tiptoed towards the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. In the dim light, she saw the silhouette of a figure outside the window, their face obscured by the curtain. Panic surged through her as she realized that someone was lurking outside her home, watching her. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. Sarah's mind raced. She had to hide. She slipped into the nearest room, a small storage closet, and closed the door behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her breathing. She could hear the intruder moving through the house, their footsteps slow and deliberate. Minutes dragged on like hours as Sarah huddled in the darkness of the closet. She strained her ears to catch any clue about the intruder's intentions, but all she could hear were whispers, faint and incomprehensible, like the murmurs of restless spirits. The house itself seemed to come alive, its walls groaning and shifting as if they held secrets of their own. Sarah's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. She had to get out of there, but how? Suddenly, the closet door creaked open, and Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A shadowy figure stood before her, their features hidden in the dim light. A voice whispered, low and menacing.
I've been watching you, Sarah.
Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to comprehend the situation. How had this person known her name? What did they want from her? The intruder stepped closer, and Sarah's fear intensified. She could smell their foul breath like decay and mold. Her heart threatened to escape her chest as she realized that there was no way out. But then, in the midst of her terror, something strange happened. The intruder began to tremble, their form wavering like a mirage. Sarah blinked in disbelief as the figure before her seemed to unravel, its edges fading into nothingness. In an instant, the intruder had vanished, leaving Sarah alone in the closet. She stepped cautiously into the hallway, her heart still racing. Had it all been a hallucination? A trick of her fear-addled mind? As she moved through the house, checking every room, she found no sign of the intruder. The windows and doors were all locked from the inside, just as she had left them. There was no way anyone could have entered or exited the house. Sarah sat down on the living room couch, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Was it a ghost? A figment of her imagination? Or something else entirely? She couldn't make sense of it. As the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, Sarah's husband returned home, finding her pale and shaken. She recounted the harrowing events of the night, but he dismissed them as the product of her imagination, a nightmare born from her loneliness and fear. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the house with her, something beyond her understanding. She knew what she had seen and heard, and it was all too real. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah tried to put the incident behind her. Life returned to normal, and the memory of that terrifying night began to fade. But then, one evening, as she sat alone in the living room, she heard it again, the soft, rhythmic tapping against the window. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to look, and there, outside the window, was the shadowy figure, its face hidden by the curtain and its eyes fixed on her. But this time, it was no hallucination. As the figure slowly raised its hand to tap against the glass, Sarah realized the horrifying truth. It was her own reflection, distorted by the dim light and her own fear. In that moment, the world spun on its axis and Sarah's reality shattered. The intruder had been her own reflection, her own shadow, amplified and twisted by her paranoia. She had been the source of her own terror all along, trapped in a cycle of fear that had turned her world upside down. As she gazed at her distorted reflection, Sarah knew that the true horror had always been within her own mind. The village of Thornhill had always been a place of eerie tales and whispered legends. Among the many stories that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers, none was as feared as the haunted forest that lay on the outskirts of their quiet community. This was the dreadful path that Becky, a small, brave-hearted girl, was forced to tread one ominous evening. Becky's family had fallen upon hard times, and the next village held the promise of a brighter future. Her mother held her close, her eyes clouded with worry, as they stood at the edge of the foreboding woods.
You must go, Becky.
Her mother said, her voice trembling.
We'll be right behind you, but you need to lead the way.
Becky nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she ventured into the dense, shadowy forest. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to swallow her whole, engulfing her in a thick, oppressive darkness. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent jolts of fear through Becky's young heart. She had heard stories of restless spirits haunting the woods, of lost souls who had ventured in and never returned. As she walked deeper into the heart of the forest, the oppressive silence was broken only by the distant hoot of an owl, echoing like a mournful dirge. Becky's footsteps echoed like thunder in her ears as she pressed on, her path illuminated only by the dim moonlight filtering through the thick canopy. Her mind played tricks on her, conjuring eerie shapes and strange whispers that seemed to emerge from the very shadows themselves. She clutched the small, wooden charm her mother had given her only source of comfort in this nightmarish labyrinth. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to close in around her, like a tightening noose. It was then that she heard it. The soft, haunting howl of wolves. Her blood ran cold as she realized she was not alone in the dark. Wolves were common in these parts, but the tales of ghost wolves that roamed the haunted forest were enough to chill even the bravest soul. Becky quickened her pace, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could. She tried to suppress the rising fear, but it was an uphill battle. The howls grew closer, and she could hear the eerie, ghostly echoes that accompanied them. As she pressed on, the wolves' presence became undeniable. She could hear their ethereal footsteps, like whispers of the night, and the sensation of being pursued waited on her like a nightmare. Panic welled up inside her, threatening to consume her completely. But then, as Becky reached the scariest part of the forest, something extraordinary happened. Her fear transformed into a fierce determination, a fiery resolve to survive. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, tales of bravery and strength in the face of darkness. She clutched the wooden charm tighter, drawing strength from her mother's love and her grandmother's wisdom. The ghostly wolves emerged from the shadows, their spectral forms shimmering in the moonlight. They circled her, their eyes like burning embers, hungering for her fear. Becky stood her ground, her heart no longer pounding with terror, but with a newfound courage.
"Leave me be."
She whispered, her voice trembling but unwavering.
"I am not your prey. You have no power over me."
As the words left her lip, a strange sensation washed over her, a surge of energy that seemed to radiate from her very core. The wolves recoiled, their ghostly forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. Becky's bravery had become a shield, a barrier that they could not breach. With each step she took, the wolves retreated, their howls turning to mournful cries of defeat. Becky walked through the heart of the scariest part of the forest, unharmed and undeterred, her courage a beacon that dispersed the malevolent spirits. When she emerged on the other side, the haunted forest had lost its grip on her. Her family rushed to her side, relief washing them as they embraced their brave daughter. The ghostly wolves had faded into the night. Becky's journey had been a harrowing one, a test of her resilience and bravery. She had faced her deepest fears and emerged victorious. Her newfound strength a testament to the powerful human spirit. And as she continued on her path to the next village, she knew that the haunted forest would forever be a part of her, a tale of courage passed down through generations.